The sovereign root. The courage to break from the host plant. In our last episode, we took an audit of our native tools. We saw how the struggles of our past weren't mistakes, but the very things that built our unique toolkits. But there comes a point in every life where having the right tools isn't enough, where the very ground you're standing on, the system you're part of, is the problem. This is the moment we all fear and yet secretly crave, the moment of the root break. Think about your own birth, your first root break. For 9 months, the womb was your entire universe. It was comfort, it was safety, it was all you knew. Do you think you wanted to leave? The evidence suggests otherwise. The mother has to push, and push hard, to force a new life into the light. The infant, prompted by pressures it doesn't understand, from organs it didn't know were there, likely fights against the journey. It is a traumatic, constricting, and terrifying passage from the womb, a world of total sustenance, into a blinding, cold, and chaotic unknown. The first thing a baby is forced to do is cry, a severance of its silent, aquatic existence. And then, the ultimate physical severance, the umbilical cord is cut. A life support system is permanently terminated. A new life begins, whether the baby likes it or not. That is the primal blueprint for every major transformation that follows, or that possibly happened before that. The universe, in its relentless push for growth, operates like a cosmic womb. It will create pressures, contractions, and narrow passages to force you out of a system that can no longer contain the life you are meant to become. You will fight it. You will cling to the familiar comfort of the shell, even as it begins to suffocate you. But the break is not a punishment. It is a delivery, literally. We all start as part of a host system, a family, a community, a nation, a set of beliefs. This host gives us our initial shape, our first nutrients, our identity. For a time, it's necessary. It's the seed shell. But a seed that never cracks, never breaks its connection to the shell, will never become a tree. It will rot in the comfort of its own confinement. The first sign of life is a rupture. This isn't a one-time event, it's a curriculum. My life has been a series of these necessary breaks, each one preparing me for the next bigger one. The death of childhood innocence. Let me be clear. For me, this wasn't a fall from a safe garden. My childhood soil was not a place of comfort. It was a territory ruled by fear. I grew up with a drug dealer for a father, abusive both physically and mentally, a figure I feared immensely. There was no idyllic world to lose, only a harsh reality to survive. This was the first subtle crack, not in a perfect shell, but in the hard, compacted earth of my circumstances. The death of innocence was the realization that the host system of my family's reality was toxic. I grew up confused, without proper guidance, torn between wanting to be like him, to gain power, and later seeing him as the enemy to rebel against. But as I grew, a different root began to stir. As the oldest of my siblings, and with a daughter, I knew I had to be different. I had to set a different example for my siblings and my child. This wasn't a gentle questioning. It was a defiant, underground push for a new kind of life. And I now cherish that early brutal immersion. That fear gifted me a profound darkness and intimate knowledge of the shadows. I didn't just hear about pain, I learned its language, its tactics, its weight. And that very knowledge is what allows me to now fully appreciate and embody the light I have been seeking ever since. You cannot truly, deeply value the light unless you have a visceral memory of the dark. That contrast became my greatest teacher, the death of dogma. As a teenager, I violently broke from the host plant of organized religion. It felt like rebellion, and it was, but it was also a survival instinct. My spirit was being strangled by doctrines that didn't align with what I felt to be true in my bones. I had to sever that connection in order to breathe. This was also a time of being utterly untethered, with no guidance at all. So I did what any system in extreme imbalance must do. I swung with equal force in the opposite direction. I dove headfirst into the shadows, embracing everything that was once forbidden. At the time, it felt like pure defiance, but I now recognize this wasn't just rebellion. It was a necessary imbalance to correct the previous imbalance of my blindly fervent worship. That violent swing was the only way I knew to break the mold completely. It was the pendulum's extreme arc that allowed it to finally find its true resting center, and in that center, a more mature understanding began to form. I knew, and have since confirmed, that there is more to the story of religion. I came to see that within even the most manipulated doctrines, there are timeless nuggets of wisdom sitting there, waiting. The man-made structures around them may be flawed, but the core truth about compassion, consequence, and connecting to a higher principle are enduring. I learned to trust that the ultimate truth will be revealed and made whole in good time, a principle echoed in the Kabbalion and otherwise text we will explore. This death of dogma wasn't the end of my faith. It was the painful, necessary birth of my own. The death of the old self for fatherhood. Moving into my 20s, becoming a father required the most conscious rubric I had ever attempted. I was in prison at the time, and the universe held a mirror to my face in the most brutal way. I saw a man twice my age, a man who had never changed, who had never broken free, and he was raising a thorn in his own image, a younger version of himself who looked, acted, and was trapped, just like me and him. And in that younger man, I saw a reflection of my own future. I became terrified. It was a crystal clear vision of a path I was still on. With my daughter on the way, the choice became a no-brainer. I decided on the spot, right there in that prison yard, this is my last visit here. This cycle ends with me. But the universe and its fierce curriculum wasn't done testing my resolve. It was during this time that I had my first near-death experience. I was brutally attacked, put in a coma for a few days, and needed brain surgery. I survived, but barely. In that liminal space between life and death, I encountered what I can only describe as a test. There were forces, let's call them archons, that would not let me pass freely. It was a brutal confrontation. I now see this entire ordeal as the ultimate test of my decision. I had the opportunity, before the attack, to be the aggressor. I could have chosen violence first and saved myself, but I chose defense, a choice that cost me dearly in that moment, leaving me broken and near death. But surviving that choice and the spiritual trials that followed marked my passage. It felt like receiving an A on the most difficult exam of my life so far. The lesson was seared into me. The old thorny ways of aggression led to a forever prison, both physical and spiritual. Choosing a different path, even if it costs you in the short term, is the only way to true freedom. This was the death of the old self. It wasn't just pruning a few branches. I was cutting down the entire tree of who I had been to make room for the father, the protector, the man I needed to become. Each of these was a practice run, a propagation on a smaller scale. They were painful, but they taught me a crucial lesson. On the other side of that severance was not emptiness, but a new kind of freedom. The ultimate test, the final exam in this brutal curriculum, was accepting deportation. This was not like the other breaks. This wasn't a choice I actively made in a moment of passion. It was a cut made for me, a surgical, legal, and physical amputation from the host plant of my entire life. My family, the country I knew, my friends, the very soil I thought I was rooted in. For a time, I saw this as ultimate failure, the ultimate punishment. But as I applied everything I had learned up until then, the perceptual flexibility, the discipline, the radical responsibility, the trust, my perspective shifted. I began to see it not as an amputation, but as a propagation. The universe, the ultimate gardener, looked at me and said, "You're ready. You have learned all you can from this host plant. Now it's time for you to become your own." I was a cutting, severed from the mother plant. It was brutal, it was terrifying, I was stripped of everything familiar and stuck into the alien soil of a new country. But a cutting contains all the life and genetic code of the original plant. It has everything it needs to grow, if it can just find the will to push new roots into unfamiliar ground. That is the ultimate act of the gardener, to take a piece of oneself and plant it anew, to willingly, or in my case, to acceptingly, enter the dark soil of the unknown and trust that your own innate force. Deportation was the sledgehammer that finally broke me from the host seed. It was the death that made my sovereignty possible, because a root system that is forever tangled with the host can never discover its own depth, its own strength, its own unique reach. So, I ask you, what is the host plant you are still attached to? Is it the identity your family gave you? The belief system you inherited but never questioned? The career path you feel trapped in? The version of yourself that was formed by trauma and that is now too comfortable to shed? These are all host systems, and your soul, if it is awake, is feeling the pressure to break the shell. It will feel like a death, because it is. It is the death of the servant, the dependent, the child. It is the birth of the sovereign. Courage is not in avoiding the break. The courage is in accepting it, in trusting that you are not being severed to be destroyed, but to be propagated, to be given the chance at long last to root yourself in the truth of your own being and become the tree you were always meant to be. Next time we'll talk about what happens after the root break. How do you govern this new sovereign self? That's in episode 4, The Internal Council. See you then.